Welcome back to Regaining the Balance. This is Matt again with another interesting book coming from a different part of the world. If you guys listened to the last audiobook I did, which was The Crucifixion, an Eyewitness, that was quite interesting as well. I'll be doing follow-up video on that and to read a little bit of the introduction and maybe do the other part at the end of the book. But otherwise, today we are going to be checking out The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ by a gentleman named Nicholas Notovitch. So, without further ado, let me just get to the book, and I'm gonna this book that I'm using today. I It has like an intro by somebody else, and then at the end of it, there's this whole other thing about like talking about what what he wrote and whatever else, like kind of its own commentary. Today, we're just gonna do. I'm just gonna read the journey to Tibet, and I'm gonna read the text. Now, this text is very interesting because it basically says that Jesus, at some point in his life, from 12 to 30 something, or what, 20 something, he traveled east and went to Tibet and India and sort of, you know, did his thing out there before coming back. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Also, if you like these kinds of audiobooks and these readings, please hit the like button, share if you think other people would be interested in it, and otherwise, subscribe if you're not already. So, let's get into this interesting story. Journey to Tibet. During the sojourn of Mr. Notovitch in India, he enjoyed frequent opportunities of mingling and holding converse with Buddhists, and the many interesting accounts which they gave him of Tibet so enthused him that he decided to take a journey to that still unexplored country. We're probably going to be here for at least an hour or two. So, continuing with this object, he chose a route leading through the enchanting valley of Kashmir, a country which he had often desired to visit. Leaving Lahore October 14th, 1887, he arrived at Rawalpindi the following day, where he made all preparations for a long and tedious journey over a region where railroads are unknown, and where the only means of conveyance are horses, a journey more or less fraught with dangers from incomplete roads through rugged mountains and the possible prey of wild animals with which the forests abound. Often the traveler may journey many weary miles without finding an inn where he may rest except the isolated bungalows which have been erected at intervals along the road by the English. These are all small houses with one floor, not particularly attractive for their comforts, but to the traveler exhausted from climbing over the rugged and dangerous mountain roads, these bungalows where he may find shelter and rest appear even as a luxury. It is not my intention to relate in detail all the incidents of this journey of Mr. Notovitch, which are sometimes tedious, nor shall I dwell on the glowing descriptions of the grand, magnificent mountain gorges and the picturesque landscapes made glorious by the songs of myriads of gay plumaged birds which one beholds with admiring eyes at every step in the forest, nor shall I attempt to describe a description of the gorgeous sunsets which renowned travelers concede cannot be seen so glorious elsewhere in all the world as the Himalayas. Not even Italy, with all her immortal fame, with which great artists have justly adorned her, can boast of such inexpressible grandeur as is displayed at sunset in these mountains. The perfectly pure atmosphere, the deep blue sky, against which the towering snow-capped peaks resemble huge masses of glittering silver, gold, and diamonds, fantastically wrought, are scenes which intoxicate the senses of man with their ravishing beauty. He is utterly incapable of describing with tongue or pen the magnificence of their splendors or the holy emotions in which the soul is inspired. I will confine myself to a faithful account of Mr. Notovitch's journey, which giving all the points of interest touched upon him. This is good, so this is not going to be a ridiculously long. Leaving the valley of the Punjab, Mr. Notovitch, which had the retinue, climbed the steep, winding road, penetrating the counterforts of the Himalayas, descending at sunset to the little town of Mari, which stands at an altitude of 7,457 feet, and is quite a summer resort for English officials and their families. Thence they descended after nightfall, resting a few hours at a bungalow, continuing the journey at dawn, reaching the hamlet Tong at noon, at which place Mr. Notovitch hired a Hindu cabriolet, which conveyance he failed to enjoy on account of the cramped position in which he was obliged to sit, quote unquote, like a Turk. Who knows what that means? He managed, however, to reach Hori in this kind of carriage, at which, oh, a nice little picture. Place he changed his model or his mode of travel and secured saddle horses. I will here relate an experience which Mr. Notovitch had at the little hamlet where he halted to rest and lunch, where provisions and all sorts of merchandise were sold. He approached a Hindu who was squatted before a kettle of boiling milk, and after having examined it somewhat cautiously to be sure that it was milk, he wanted to purchase a glassful of it, whereupon the merchant offered him the kettle and its contents. At this our traveler remonstrated, saying that he only desired one glass of it. It was there that he learned his first lesson in orthodox Brahmanism. Quote, "According to our laws," said the Hindu, "if a stranger is one not belonging to our caste, touches, gazes, or points his fingers at our food, by such act it is polluted and we cannot eat it. We must not only throw it away, but must thoroughly cleanse and purify the utensil." Unquote. This will, of course, seem perfectly absurd to the people of the West, but there are, I may add, deep metaphysical laws underlying many of these seemingly useless ceremonies which would not be understood by the reader without a thorough study. I will not therefore attempt to explain them here. Mr. Notovitch resumed his journey and reached next evening the celebrated valley of Kashmir. This quote-unquote happy valley is situated between the ranges of the Himalaya mountains and is about 85 miles long and 25 wide, through the length of which wind in a serpentine course, of which wind in a serpentine course the sparkling waters of the river Jhelum. This valley is no doubt the most beautiful in the world, and with its placid lakes, its sparkling rivers on which are hundreds of floating houses in which live as many families the year round, its fairy-like gardens floating on the lakes, its hills and islands covered with antique buildings, and its happy, easygoing, picturesque inhabitants, both male and female, robed in long white gowns with full, loose, flowing sleeves, the men with snow-white turbans, the women with little caps or bonnets, all of whom spend their time in their numerous devotional exercises, or quietly working on their celebrated shawls, or working curious designs in gold and silver, for which there is but a dull market these days of rapid machine imitations. And above all, the balmy atmosphere of this garden of the gods conspires to make one forget all his troubles, real or imaginary. There are legends extant regarding this valley, one of which claims that in very ancient times this valley was a great lake, and that invading king ordered his men to make a passage between the two rocks in the gorge, thereby, the text is a little funky here, draining the lake of its waters, and something, 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 by which he gained glory over the inhabitants. Another legend is that the waters themselves forced a passage between the rocks of a gorge, leaving nothing in the great lake except a few lagoons and the river Jhelum. Mr. Notovitch reached Srinagar, the capital of Kashmir, on the evening of October 19th, where he remained 6 days, spending the time in making a long excursion into the surrounding country, examining old ruins and studying the peculiar customs of the people. The history of Kashmir is full of interesting incidents. I will give only a short sketch. A Mohammedan writer, Nur ul-Din, who begins the history of Kashmir with the creation, affirms that the valley was visited by Adam after the fall, that the descendants of Seth, this is interesting, reigned over the country for 1,110 years. It's pretty exact. And that after the deluge it became peopled by a tribe from Turkestan. The Hindu historians add that after the line of Seth became extinct, the Hindus conquered the country and ruled it until the period of the deluge, and that the Kashmirians were afterwards taught the worship of one god by Moses. It appears from chronicles actually existing that Kashmir has been a regular kingdom for a period far beyond the limits of history in general. From the year 2666 BC to 1024 AC, it has been governed by princes of Hindu and Tartar dynasties, and their names have been duly handed down to posterity. In the reign of Ashoka, about the 3rd century before Christ, Buddhism was introduced, and after remaining there for some time under Tartar princes, the religion of the country was again succeeded by Hinduism. In the middle of the 14th century, the Mohammedans appeared on the scene and annexed for a time Tibet to the kingdom of Kashmir. Sikandar, one of the Mohammedan monarchs, destroyed the Hindu temples and images by fire, and forced the people at the point of the bayonet to adopt the Mohammedan faith. At the end of the 16th century, Akbar conquered this province. He took a fatherly interest in the people, but the loyalty of his children was but short-lived, as certain persons raised an insurrection. 1752, the country passed from the possession of the Mughal throne and fell under the rule of the Duranis, and for many years was convulsed by a series of wars and rebellions and subject to numerous governors. In 1813, Ranjit Singh, the Lion of the Punjab, became one of the recognized recognized princes of India and subdued the province of Kashmir. The Sikhs ruled for a time, and after the English invasion of the Punjab, it came under the British rule. Now, I guess we kind of understand why Kashmir is such a hot spot. The English, however, is in consideration of $3,750,000 handed over the unfortunate Kashmirians to the tender mercies of Gulab Singh, an attendant and counselor of Ranjit Singh, the most thorough ruffian that ever created a villain from a kingdom down to a halfpenny, unquote. And the, quote, paradise of the Indies, unquote, was relinquished by English land and forever, as was then supposed. But only a few years ago, the present Maharaja was deprived of his powers by the British government, and the country is now under British protection, quote unquote. my emphasis. The, quote, happy valley, unquote, of Kashmir does not possess the glory and prosperity that it did under the Mughal emperors, though whose court enjoyed here the sweetness of pleasure in the midst of the pavilion, still standing on the islands of the lake. This was a great resort for the princes of Hindustan, who formerly came to spend the summer months and to enjoy the magnificent and unrivaled festivals given by the Mughals. But time has wrought sad changes for this valley and former glory. I will add, however, that notwithstanding these changes, the Kashmirians have wonderfully preserved their artistic skill and mechanical talent. Kashmir shawls have attained a worldwide reputation. At the Paris Exposition in 1878 was exhibited with wonderful Indian products. A shawl worked with a map of the city of Srinagar, showing its streets and houses, its gardens and temples, with people interspersed here and there in boats on the calm blue waters of the river, giving a clear, lifelike picture as in a photograph. Another shawl was one mass of the most delicate embroidery, representing the conventional Persian and Kashmir wilderness of flowers, with birds of the loveliest plumage singing among the bloom, and the wonderful animals and wondering men. In fact, the embroidery on wall of Kashmir, both loom and hand wrought, is of historical and universal fame. Elaborately chased goblets, rosewater sprinklers in ruddy gold and parcel gilt testify to the Kashmir's goldsmith skill. The fine gemmed and enamel jewelry in India is that of Kashmir. The enumeration in Isaiah 3:17-24 of the articles of the Mundus Muliebris of the daughters of Zion read like an inventory of the exceedingly classical-looking jewelry of Kashmir. That's interesting. The lacquered paper mache of Kashmir is the choicest in India. Constant invasions and plunderers have reduced the Kashmirians to poverty. They still retain much of their proud mien. The men are strongly built, the women the most beautiful in the world, with their clear white complexions and haughty bearing. Srinagar, the capital, sometimes called Kashmir, is situated on the banks of the Jhelum, along which it extends the distance of about 3 miles. In the houses of the 2 stories in which live a population of 100,000 inhabitants border the banks of the river, which is spanned by several bridges. The city is a little over a mile in width, and steps lead from the houses, to the waters of the Jhelum, where all the day people are to be seen performing their sacred ablutions, bathing, or cleansing their utensils of copper. So, sacred ablutions meaning their baptisms, because in these cultures, having daily baptism is part of their lifestyle. One part of the inhabitants are followers of the Mohammedan religion. 2/3 are Hindu, with a few Buddhists interspersed among them. Manufacturers of shawls, gun makers, workers in leather and paper mache, jewelers, tailors, shoemakers, watch menders, in fact, all sorts of artisans remarkable for their mechanical talent are to be found in this city. A visit to the showrooms of the shawl merchants is a pleasure to the traveler. Around the city, there are several interesting places. The Tukti Suleiman, or Solomon's Throne, is an old Hindu temple. The oldest in Kashmir, situated upon a hill 1,000 feet above the plain. Its erection is ascribed to Joloka, the son of Ashoka, who reigned in the 3rd century before Christ. The fort of Hari Parvat is another interesting site built by Akbar in 1597 AC at a cost of $5 million. On the morning of October 27th, Mr. Notovitch left this interesting city to journey towards Tibet, adding to his retinue by purchasing a large dog, which had previously made the journey in company with the well-known explorers Bonvalot, Capus, and Pepin. Upon reaching the chain of mountains which separate the valley of Kashmir from the gorge of Sindh, the party were obliged to crawl on all fours almost all the way over a summit of 3,000 feet high. Whoa. The carriers were quite exhausted from their heavy loads and from the fear of rolling down the deep declivity. I bet. Descending from this point, they passed through several villages, Chokodar, Dras, Kargil, etc., halting only at these places for rest or to procure fresh horses. Kargil is the chief town of the district, and the scenery is certainly picturesque. It is situated on the confluence of the Suruwaka rivers in a view on which its left side is one of the most striking the traveler can ever behold. Mr. Notovitch procured fresh horses here and continued his journey over a route far from being pleasant or safe, sometimes passing over a very dangerous road, other times being obliged to cross a shaky bridge consisting, as many bridges do in Kashmir, of two long beams or trunks of trees inserted in the crevices of the rocks on either bank, and small poles or stones laid across, sometimes piles of wood being thrown on the poles and the whole covered with earth. The traveler, when crossing this point, might well tremble at the thought of a possible dislodgement of a stone or the oscillation of the beams, which would precipitate the whole construction into the yawning chasm beneath. Mr. Notovitch entered the boundaries of the Ladakh or Little Tibet and was much astonished to find a sweet, simple, happy people who did not indulge in or know what quarreling was. Especially was he astonished at this, since polyandry flourishes there among the low-class people. Polyandry is a subject on which different writers have risked their opinions without knowing the facts. It is true that among the non-Aryan hill tribes this custom has existed for centuries, and the Hindu rulers did not interfere with them. They relied not on forcing their views upon a people, but on educating them to it. The hill tribes who follow the customs of polyandry are isolated communities and socially have no connection with the Hindus. The trans-Himalayan tribes, too, follow this custom, which has existed among them for a long time. In Ladakh, among the low-class people, each woman has from 3 to 5 husbands, and that in the most legitimate manner in the world. And this is the custom: when a man marries a woman, she becomes the legal wife of all his brothers. If there is but one son in the family, he usually marries into a family where there are already 2 or 3 husbands and never but one wife. The days of each husband are fixed in advance, and each acquits himself of his duties promptly in the most agreeable manner. The men are not long-lived or so robust as the women. That's why it's done that way. This practice existed long before Buddhism was introduced into that country, which religion is gradually uprooting the practice, which is scarcely sanctioned among the more intelligent or better classes. From the description given by Mr. Notovitch, it is evident that, like other foreign travelers, he has formed his opinions of the people from those with whom he came in contact. I know full well how difficult it is for a foreigner to get access to the better classes of Oriental society. In very rare instances where one has influence with native of high standing, has he the opportunity to see or know the better side. We will leave polyandry and follow our traveler on his journey. From Kargil, he went to the village of Sorgol, 20 miles from the former and standing on the banks of the Waka. Near it are to be seen masses of rocks forming along broad walls, upon which have been thrown in apparent disorder flat stones of various colors and sizes, on which are engraved all sorts of prayers in Urdu, Sanskrit, and Tibetan characters. Leaving Sorgol with fresh horses, Mr. Notovitch made the next halt at the village of Waka. Upon an isolated rock overlooking the village stands the convent of Mulbek. With its interpreter and black servant, he proceeded to this convent. That's interesting, huh? So with his interpreter and the black servant, he proceeded to this convent. They climbed the narrow steps carved in the solid rock, on which were placed little prayer wheels, which are little drum-like shaped, covered around the sides with leather and fitted vertically in niches cut in the rock. A spindle running through the center enables them to revolve at the slightest touch or breeze. There are usually several of these wheels in a row. Larger ones are placed separate. All are decorated on the leather bands with the mystic sentence Om Mani Padme Om, i.e. Om, the jewel and the lotus. Amen. In the top, he was greeted by a lama, attired in the usual monk's robe of yellow, with a cap of the same material, carrying in his right hand a prayer wheel made of copper, which he twirled from time to time with his left hand without interrupting the conversation. The lama conducted the visitor through long, low rooms and halls into an open terrace, where as soon as they were seated, attendants brought refreshments. The Tibetan language is spoken here. It is only in the monasteries that the Tibetan language is spoken in its purity. The lamas prefer visits from Europeans to those from Mohammedans. The reason of this is preferences, as the lama said, quote, "The Mohammedans have no point of contact with our religion. In their recent victorious campaign, they converted by force many Buddhists to Islam. Islamism. It will require great efforts to bring back these descendants of Buddhists into the way of the true God. As for the Europeans, it is an entirely different matter. Not only do they profess the essential principles of monotheism, but they are also a part of the worshippers of Buddha under almost the same title as the Tibetan Lamas. The only error of the Christians is that they, after having adopted the great doctrine of Buddha, they completely separated themselves from him and created a different Dalai Lama. Ours alone has received the divine favor of seeing face to face the majesty of Buddha and the power to serve as mediator between the earth and heaven. Of course. And quote, "Who is this Dalai Lama of the Christians of whom you have just spoken?" asked Mr. Notovitch to the Lama. Quote, "We have a Son of God whom we address our fervent prayers, and it is to him that we have our recourse so that he may intercede for us to our only and indivisible God," unquote. And then he responds, quote, "He is not the one in question here, Sahib. We also respect him whom you recognize as the Son of the only God, but we do not regard him as such, but as the excellent being chosen from among all. Buddha, in truth, incarnated himself with his intelligence in the sacred person, Isa, who, without the aid of either fire or sword, went forth to spread our grand and true religion throughout the world. I allude to your earthly Dalai Lama, to whom you give the title of Father of the Church. Here lies the great sin. Is he able to save the sinners who are on the wrong road?" began the Dalai Lama, twirling his prayer wheel. Of course, he alluded to the Pope. "You have just told me that a son of Buddha, Isa, had been chosen to spread your religion over the world. Who then is he?" asked Mr. Notovitch. The Lama was amazed at the question, but said in reply, quote, "Isa is a great prophet, one of the first after the 22 Buddhas. He is greater than all the Dalai Lamas, for he constitutes a part of the spirituality of God. It is he who has instructed you, who brings back the frivolous souls to the knowledge of God, who has rendered you worthy of the blessings of the Creator, and who has endowed each being with a knowledge of good and evil. His name and deeds have been recorded in our sacred writings, and while reading of his great life spent in the midst of erring people, we weep over the horrible sin of those heathens who assassinated him after putting him to the most cruel torture." Mr. Notovitch was struck by the words of the Lama. The prophet Isa, his tortures, his death, the Christian Dalai Lama, and the recognition of Christianity by the Buddhists, all this made him think more and more of Jesus Christ, and he begged his interpreter to omit none of the words of the Lama. He asked the Lama where those sacred writings could be found and who had written them. "The principal rolls," said the Lama, "which have been compiled in India and Nepal at different times according to the course of events, are to be found at Lhasa and number several thousand. In some of the larger convents there are copies made by the Lamas at different times during their sojourn at Lhasa and presented to their convents in remembrance of their sojourn with the great master, our Dalai Lama. Do you not possess any of these copies related to the prophet Isa?" Notovitch asks. "No, we have none of them. Our convent is rather unimportant, and since its foundation, our successive lamas have only collected a few hundred works for their own use. The great cloisters possess thousands of them, but they are sacred things, and they will not show them to you." They conversed together a little longer, after which Mr. Notovitch retired to the camp, reflecting deeply on all the words of the Lama. Isa, the prophet of Buddhists? How could that be? Being of the Jewish origin, he lived in Palestine and Egypt, and the scriptures contain not a word, not the slightest allusion to the role which Buddhism must have played in the education of Jesus. He decided to visit all the convents of Tibet, hoping to gather more ample information concerning the prophet Isa and perhaps find copies of the documents in question. Our traveler continued his journey across the pass of Namikula, 13,000 feet high. He arrived at the village of Lemiru. That's a strange name. Where he put up at an inn just under the windows of a convent, where he was immediately visited by several monks who plied him with many questions as to the route he came by, the object of his journey, etc., etc. Lemiru sounds just like Lemira, or Lemura, right? I can't say that word right now. So Lemiru, as the name would imply, was the headquarters of the Lamas and their religion for many years. Upon the extreme top ledge of the precipice of the concrete stone stands the old monastery, curious enough in its construction of stone overlooking the village, some 100 feet below, the houses being perched on pinnacles of rock and scattered about here and there. The illustration, page 105, represents a cluster of monument-like buildings which line the path and are dotted about in groups of from 3 to 12 or 14 together. They stand about 7 feet high and are, as the inhabitants of the village claim, erected over the defunct lamas and other saints of the Buddhist religion, after which they became sacred in the eyes of the faithful, who refer to them with bowing and scrapings and Om Mani Padme Om innumerable. After some conversation, the monks invited Mr. Notovitch to visit the convent, which invitation he at once accepted, and followed them up the steep passages cut out in the solid rock, which was thickly studded with prayer wheels that are set twirling by the slightest touch, which is unavoidable in ascending the narrow passage. He was conducted to a room, the walls of which were adorned with books, prayer wheels, numerous statues of Buddha. He inquired about the manuscript relating to Isa, of which he had heard from the Lama of Mudbek Monastery. The monks here also denied having any of the rolls in their possession. One monk, however, acknowledged that he had seen many copies of the manuscript in a convent near Lie, where he had spent many years previous to his appointment in Lemiro. But the visitor was unable to induce the monk to mention the name of the convent where the rolls were kept, and further questioning only provoked suspicion. Europeans have not yet understood the reason why the monks and other custodians of the sacred literature of the East have been unwilling to give full information about the manuscripts, although they would gladly explain the significance of other sacred objects, nor did Mr. Notovitch comprehend the reason for the refusal of the monks of Lemiru to give him the desired information of the rolls relating to Jesus Christ. In India, also, the European scholars and professors meet with the same difficulties. Dr. Peterson, professor of Oriental languages, met with a similar experience there. There is a famous library of Jain manuscripts at Cambay, India. Dr. Peterson, in 1885, desiring to examine the manuscripts, made application to the custodians of the library, but was met with the most positive denial of the existence of any such library. Professor Roth of Tübingen wanted to know if there was a manuscript of the Atharva Veda in the Brahmin library of Gwalior, but he was unable to obtain any information. Although the political officer of that part of the country used his influence to put him in possession of a copy of the book, Dr. Bhandarkar of the Deccan College, Pune, succeeded in examining only a few manuscripts of the Jain libraries of Patan, and that only through the influence of the ruling prince H. Gaikwar of the Baroda. Doctors Brüller and Keilhorn of Vienna and Leipzig are under the fond impression that they have examined the whole collection of the Jain manuscripts at Jaisalmer. But I know as a fact that the most important collection has never been shown to any foreigner. Europeans, so just to mention this, this book is kind of written by an Indian guy, and so he is sort of giving this whole truncated version of the book that Notovitch wrote, and but he adds the entire text that he provides in the book. So continuing. But I know as a fact that most important collections have never been shown to any foreigner. Europeans, as I said, have not been able to understand the reason why they are met with opposing obstacles in the search of ancient manuscripts. To me, however, in my official capacity as the secretary of the Jain Association of India, the reason is simple enough. In the first place, the Mohammedan invaders of India burned our sacred manuscripts by hundreds and thousands, and secondly, the first Christian missionaries who visited India possessed themselves of some of these manuscripts simply with a view to deride and belittle them, as it appears even in these days, from the mass of rubbish which they have published in India on the religions of the people of that country. The Hindus and the Jains, therefore, have always shown reluctance to part with their manuscripts. Now, I want to just say that right there, what he just said is absolutely the truth, and and I mean, it is true. The Christians obviously have a terrible history of burning everything that didn't agree with them, especially during the Middle Ages and onwards. And it's sad. We don't, all this knowledge is gone for what? Because people can't handle that someone else has a different opinion. It's so crazy. It's just like how human beings descend into this kind of ignorance. And we're doing it all again, right now. Even though we have all this information at our fingertips. It's just nuts. Continuing, Tibet and especially Ladakh has had the same experience. A former ruler of Tibet, Langdar, otherwise called Langharma, had tried to abolish the Buddhist doctrine in 900 AC. He had commanded all temples and monasteries to be demolished, the images to be destroyed, and the sacred books to be burnt. So intense was the indignation excited by these acts of sacrilege that he was murdered in the same year. In the 16th century, the historical books concerning Ladakh were destroyed by the fanatical Mohammedans of Skardo, who invaded the country, burned the monasteries, temples, and religious monuments, and threw the contents of various libraries into the river Indus. It is astonishing, then, that the Lama of the Lamiro monastery should look upon, or is it astonishing then, that the Lama of Lamiro monastery should look with suspicions on the minute questioning of Mr. Notovitch? Well, I agree. From Lamiro, Mr. Notovitch directed his attention towards Leh with an avowed determination of securing the manuscripts in question or go to Lhasa. He therefore journeyed onward over difficult gorges, dangerous mountain passes, and through pleasant valleys, passing the celebrated fortress of Khalsi, dating from the time of the Mohammedan invasion, this being the only road leading from Kashmir to Tibet. And crossing the valley, Saspula, and near the village of the same name, one sees two convents, on one of which our traveler was surprised to see floating a French flag, a present he afterwards learned from a French engineer and used by the monks simply as a decoration. Mr. Notovitch spent the night at the village and visited these convents where the monks took great delight in showing their visitors their books, rolls, images of Buddha, and the prayer wheels explaining politely and patiently all the sacred objects. Here also Mr. Notovitch received the same answers in reply to his inquiries, i.e., the great monasteries alone possessed the copies related to the prophet Isa. From here, the traveler hastened onwards towards Leh, with no other object now than to secure a copy of the Buddhist records of the life of Jesus, which might perhaps, he thought, show the inner life of the best of men and complete the details so indistinct which the scriptures give us about him. On his arrival at Leh, Mr. Notovitch put up the bungalow especially built for Europeans who come over the Indian route in the hunting season. Leh, the capital of Ladakh, is a small town of 5,000 inhabitants. It is built on pinnacles of rock. From a distance, it has an imposing appearance which it owes entirely to the palace, built on a slight eminence, possessing a front of 250 feet, which is 7 stories high. High above it, on the summit of a rocky mountain, is the monastery with its painted battlements and flags. In the center of the town is a square or market where the merchants of India, China, Turkestan, Kashmir, and Tibet come to exchange their products for Tibetan gold. The governor of Ladakh, Vizier Surajbal, who has taken his degree as Doctor of Philosophy in London, resides in a vast 2-story building in the center of town. In honor of the foreign visitor, he organized a polo game in the square, ending in the evening with dances and games in front of his terrace. The following day, Mr. Notovitch visited the famous Himis monastery about 20 miles from Leh, situated on a high rock in the midst of the valley overlooking the river Indus. Himis is one of the principal monasteries of the country and contains a vast library of sacred works. The entrance door is about 6 feet high with steps leading up to it. The large, massive doors, painted with bright colors, open into a court paved with pebbles. Inside is the principal temple containing a large statue of Buddha and other smaller statues. On the left is a veranda with an immense prayer wheel on it. And right there is a row of rooms for monks, all adorned with sacred paintings and small prayer wheels. Take a quick sip. The windows of the upper story, looking outward, have no panels of glass, but are closed by black curtains upon which are sewn figures of a Latin cross, interesting, formed of white strips of cloth. The cross is in different forms, has been recognized as a mystic symbol by all ancient nations, indeed. At the moment of this arrival, Mr. Notovitch found all the lamas at the convent with their lama-in-chief formed in a circle around the great prayer wheel. Underneath the veranda, several musicians held drums and long trumpets. The whole company was anxiously waiting in silence the commencement of a great religious mystery which was about to be presented. It is called a religious drama. On certain days of the year, religious dramas are performed by the lamas, who call them Tambinchi, the bliss of instruction. Sometimes these dramas are performed by them in honor of distinguished visitors to their convent. Masked actors are introduced who represent fantastically the various states of existence, spirits, men, animals, etc. This festival, with its singing, music, and dancing, lasted for several hours. At the end, the Lama-in-Chief invited the visitor to accompany him to the principal terrace where they drank the chang of the festival, a kind of tasteless beer. Regarding this religious festival, the Lama explained to the visitor that there was a religious side to all this theatrical performance which expressed to the initiate the fundamental principles of Buddhism and was a practical means for maintaining the ignorant in obedience and love to the only Creator, just as a child is submissive to its parent by a plaything. Isn't that funny? Here's yet another theme of the same idea, right? And was a practical means for maintaining the ignorant in obedience and love to the only Creator, just as a child is submissive to its parent by a plaything. You know, I'll always stop and point this out. No matter what texts we're reading, we always come to a point where religious attitudes, here it is, yet again, playing itself out in Buddhism this time. These monasteries have several such festivals in a year where particulars are arranged by the lamas who represent mysteries which have a great analogy to the pantomimes, where each actor executes almost all the movements and gestures he pleases in conforming himself to a principal idea. The mysteries of these pantomimes are nothing but a representation of the gods enjoying a general veneration which as a reward ought to give to man the happiness of conscience which the idea of inevitable death and that of the future life fill him. Seizing upon the first moment which represents to broach the subject, Mr. Notovitch told the Lama that in a recent visit he had made to Gonpa, one of the Lamas had spoken of a prophet Isa and asked for further information. The Lama replied, quote, "The name of Isa is much respected among Buddhists, but he is scarcely known except among the chief Lamas who have read the rolls relating to his life. There is an infinite number of Buddhas similar to Isa, and the 84,000 rolls which exist abound in detail about each of them. But very few people have read 100th part of them. In order to conform to the established custom, each pupil or Lama who has visited Lhasa does not fail to make a present of one or more of these copies to the convent to which he belongs. Our monastery possesses a great number of these, and among them are descriptions of the life and works of Buddha Isa, who preached the holy doctrines in India, and among the sons of Israel, and who was put to death by the heathen, whose descendants adopted the beliefs which he advocated, and these beliefs are yours. The great Buddha, where's my mouse? Yeah. The great Buddha, the soul of the universe, is the incarnation of Brahma. He remains motionless most of the time, enclosing within himself of all things since the origin of beings, and his breath gives life to the world. He has left man to his own will at certain times. However, he throws off his inaction and invests himself with a human form in order to try and save his creatures from irremediable destruction. In the course of his terrestrial experience, Buddha creates a new world among the misled people when he disappears again from the earth to become once more an invisible being, returning to his life of perfect felicity. 3,000 years ago, the great Buddha incarnated himself into the celebrated Prince Shakyamuni, upholding and spreading abroad the doctrines of his 20 incarnation. 2,500 years ago, the great soul of the world incarnated itself again in Gautama, casting the foundation of a new world in Burma, in Siam, and in different islands. Soon afterwards, Buddhism commenced to penetrate in China, thanks to the perseverance of the wise men who devoted themselves to propagate the holy doctrine. And under Ming Ti, of the dynasty of Honi, about 2050 BC, the doctrines of Sakyamuni received the adoption of the people. Simultaneously with the appearance of Buddhism in China, the doctrine commenced to spread itself among the Israelites. About 2,000 years ago, the perfect being, still remaining in a state of inaction, incarnated himself in a newborn babe of a poor family. He willed that infant lips, by employing popular images, might enlighten the unfortunate people on the life beyond the grave, and might bring back men to the true path by indicating to them by his own example the way which would be best led to them, by the way which would be best led them to the original moral purity. Sorry, I totally butchered that. By indicating to them by his own example the way which would best lead them to the original moral purity. There, better. When the holy child had reached a certain age, he was taken to India, where, until he became a man, he studied all the laws of the great Buddha, whose everlasting dwelling is in heaven. The rolls brought from India to Nepal and from Nepal to Tibet relating to the life of Isa are written in the Pali language. How interesting. Okay, so the books of Shiva and all that kind of stuff was also written in the Pali language as well, just to point that out. Um, okay, so it's written in the Pali language, and these are to be found at Lhasa, but a copy in our language, Tibetan, exists here. Here, the masses are, however, ignorant of Isa. There is scarcely anyone but the great lamas who know of him because they have spent their entire lives studying these roles which relate to Isa. But as his doctrine does not constitute a canonical part of Buddhism, and as the worshippers of Isa, Christians, do not recognize the authority of the Dalai Lama in Tibet, the prophet Isa is, like many of his kind, not recognized as one of their principal saints. Here, Mr. Notovitch, and that was the end of the Lama's speech there. Here, Mr. Notovitch inquires whether the act would be sinful should he recite these copies to a stranger. The Lama replied, quote, "That which belongs to God belongs also to men. Duty obliges us to help with good grace the propagation of his doctrine, only I have no knowledge of where in our libraries these rolls are to be found. If you ever visit our gonpa again, it will be a pleasure to me to show them to you." Unquote. Whereupon the Lama rose, saying that he was wanted for the sacrifices, and asked kindly to be excused, and saluted the visitor, disappearing through the doorway. There was nothing left for the somewhat disappointed traveler to do but return to Lhasa and think out a plan which would furnish an excuse for returning to the convent. 2 days later, he sent to the chief lama a present consisting of an alarm clock and a thermometer, with a message that he would probably pay a second visit to the convent before leaving Ladakh, and hoped that the lama would favor him by showing him the rolls which had been the subject of their last conversation. Mr. Notovitch had formed the plan of leaving for Kashmir and again returning to Himis in order to allay any suspicion which might arise regarding his persistent inquiries concerning those roles of the life of Isa. But fate decided the matter in his favor, for in passing along the mountainside on top of which stands the Gonpa of Pitak, his horse stumbled, by which our traveler was thrown to the ground and his leg broken. Not desiring to return to Leh, he ordered his porters to carry him to the Himis monastery, where he was received and kindly cared for. Mr. Notovitch says, quote, "In the morning I bandaged my leg with small oblong sticks which I tied together with a cord. I tried to make no superfluous movements. A favorable result was soon apparent. 2 days afterwards, I was in a condition to leave Gonpa and to undertake a slow journey towards India to find a doctor. While a young boy kept twirling all the time the prayer wheels, which was near my bed, the venerable old man who superintended the Gonpa monastery entertained me with interesting stories. He often drew from their cases my alarm clock and my watch, asking me how to wind them up and what was their use. Acceding finally to my urgent request, he brought me 2 large bound books whose large leaves of paper had become yellow by time. He then read to me the biography of Isa, which I wrote down carefully in my notebook according to the translation which my interpreter made for me. This curious document is written in the form of isolated verses, which very often have no connection with one another." Now, when he's saying this is the Gospel of Thomas is written exactly the same way. Exactly. Just to throw that out there. So you have these very similar styles of writing that, which we're about to get into. Continuing, quote, "The third day, my health was so much improved that it allowed me to continue my journey. After having addressed my leg, I turned back, crossing Kashmir on my way to India. I have long since desired to publish the life of Jesus Christ, which I found at Himis, and of which I have spoken above, but all kinds of business have completely taken up my time, and it is only today, after having spent long restless nights in arranging my notes, after having suitably grouped the verses in accordance with the narrative and impressed upon the whole of the character of unity, that I resolved to publish this curious copy." So yeah, here he's clearly telling you that he's suitably grouped the verses in accordance with the narrative. I wish he kind of hadn't done that. But it is what it is. So, here we go, guys. We're going to get into this. The life of Saint Isa, the best of the sons of men, from a Buddhist monastery. And like I said earlier on, this book goes actually a little further back, and I believe talks about Noah and everything like that. So, here we go. "The earth trembled and the heavens wept because of the great crime just committed in the land of Israel. For they have just finished torturing and executing There the great just Isa, in whom dwelt the soul of the universe, who incarnated himself in a simple mortal in order to do to good men in order to do good to men and to exterminate evil thoughts, and in order to bring back man degraded by his sins a life of peace, love, and good, and recall him to the only indivisible Creator whose mercy is infinite and boundless. This is what the merchants who came from Israel relate on the subject. So, this whole thing here, the merchants who came from Israel to relate on the subject, they don't call the merchants Jewish. And one of the things that I will be showing in the very near future is that, our good old Canaanite Phoenicians have had and continue to have trade routes to India from high antiquity. And this is, I don't even think, actually disputed by academia itself. I will be bringing a lot more information on that, but this whole idea that I have that, like, all right, well, was Jesus really Jewish or was he Phoenician? That kind of thing, and who knows? But to me, this is an interesting subject because, these merchants, if they were Phoenicians, and first of all, early Christianity exploded in Phoenicia and in Syria, that whole area above Israel itself. So who knows? Anyways, continuing. The people of Israel lived on a very fertile land, yielding 2 harvests a year, and possessed large flocks, so they excited by their sins the wrath of God, who inflicted on them a terrible punishment, taking away their land, their flocks, and their possessions. Israel was reduced to slavery by the powerful and rich pharaohs who then reigned in Egypt. The latter had made themselves slaves of the Israelites and treated them worse than beasts, overloading them with heavy and difficult work and putting them in irons, covering their bodies with wounds and scars, and denying them sufficient food and shelter. This was in order to keep them in a state of continual fear and deprive them of all the resemblance to human beings. And in this great calamity, the people of Israel remembered their heavenly protector, prayed and implored his grace and pity. An illustrious Pharaoh reigned in Egypt at this time, who rendered himself famous by his numerous victories and riches, which he had accumulated, and the large palaces which his slaves had erected with their own hands. This Pharaoh, who had 2 sons, the younger of whom was called Mosa, the wise men of Israel taught him different sciences. And they loved Mosa in Egypt for his kindness and for the compassion which he showed to all who suffered. Seeing that the Israelites would not, in spite of the intolerable sufferings which they endured, abandon their God to worship those which the hand of man had made, and which were the gods of the Egyptians, Mosa believed in their invisible God, who did not allow their weakened forces to fail. And the Israelite teachers excited the ardor of Mosa and implored him to intercede with Pharaoh, his father, in favor of his co-religionists. The Prince Mosa applied to his father, imploring him to ameliorate the fate of the unfortunate people, but Pharaoh was enraged against him and only increased the torments of his slaves. Shortly afterwards, a great misfortune visited Egypt. A plague cut down the young and the old, the sick and the well. Pharaoh believed that his own gods were angry with him, but Prince Mosa told his father that it was the God of the slaves who was interceding in favor of the unfortunates and was punishing the Egyptians. Pharaoh then ordered Mosa to take all the slaves of the Jewish race and lead them out of the city, and to found at a great distance from the capital another city, and there to live with them. Mosa told the Hebrew slaves that he had freed them in the name of his God, the God of Israel. He departed with them from the city and from the land of Egypt. He led them into the land which they had formerly lost by their many sins. He gave them laws and advised them always to pray to the invisible Creator, whose kindness is infinite. After the death of the prince Mosa, the Israelites observed his laws rigorously. God, too, recompensed them for the evils to which they had been subjected to in Egypt. Their kingdom became the most powerful in all the world. Their kings became illustrious on account of their treasures, and peace reigned long among the people of Israel. Now, the fame of the riches of Israel were spread throughout the earth, and the neighboring nations envied them. Now, this is interesting. Okay, and I say this is interesting because we have 2 different sources here. So this description of Pharaoh, first of all, of Moses convincing his father to let them go is not at all what we have in the Bible. However, it is what is mentioned in Manetho's account here. Let's see here. So it is also said that the priest who ordained their polity and laws was by birth a native of Heliopolis, and that he was named Osarsiph from Osiris, the god venerated at Heliopolis. He adds, however, that when he went over to these people, the slaves, his name was changed, and he was called Moises, Musus, or Moses. Manetho again says, after this, Amenophis returned from Ethiopia with a great force, and Ramses his son also with other forces, and encountered the shepherds and the unclean people. They, quote, defeated them and slew the multitudes of them and pursued the remainder to the borders of Syria. Now, there's that section of that, right? And then a couple pages back, we have of the shepherd kings here. So it's this chapter of the shepherd kings itself, and it's the story of the Hyksos, who come and take over Egypt, and the shepherd kings, and the whole 9 yards. But here is another section here, and so according to this stipulation, they departed from Egypt with all their families and effects in number not less than 240,000, and bent their way through the desert towards Syria. But as they stood in fear of the Assyrians, who had then dominion over Asia, they built a city in that country, which is now called Judea, of sufficient size to contain this multitude of men, and named it Jerusalem. Now, say what you will about what this particular book that we're reading says, but in the Manetho writing, this is the almost identical, and mind you, this author had put them in chronological order, okay? So, and just like Corey's fragments, it's just kind of all over the place here with the different parts, but, the reference in Manetho and the reference in this book are almost the same story. There is no destruction of the Egyptian army and all that other stuff, no parting of the Red Sea or any of that. But interestingly enough, in this Corey's Ancient Fragments, the Phoenician, Carthaginian, Babylonian, Egyptian, and other authors, it definitely tells a very similar story. And I'm going to bring another video back into this, because I'm going to deep dive into this book here, because there's some interesting clues with that. And then, of course, the Bhavishya Purana, which if you guys have not listened to that audio that I did, you might want to check that out. But one of the things it definitely says here is that the Malecha people basically, the Malecha people essentially, well, here's the interesting. So Gautama ruled over 10 years from his Sakya Muni was born, who ruled 20 years. His son, blah, 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 blah. And this is the first position of Kali Yuga, and the Vedic religion was destroyed. But there was another section where it talks about how, and I can't seem to find it now, but I kind of know off the top of my head. But essentially, it's saying that, the Malecha religion, which is what they're considering anything but Vedic religion, basically conquered the entire world. And so here we have in the Bhavishya Purana, they talk about the Bhavishya Purana and what happens, and that eventually, the Vedic system and the Aryavada and all that kind of stuff descended into basically, degradation. But it's funny because the way that they talk about how the Malecha religion then spread out all over the world is exactly what this book is saying. It's saying the same thing. Their kingdom became the most powerful in all of the world. Their king became illustrious on account of their treasures, and peace reigned long among the people of Israel. The fame of the riches of Israel was spread throughout the earth, and neighboring nations envied them. Now, I'm gonna reference back to these particular lines, but I just wanted to show you guys that there are correlating all other texts that have similar writing styles and saying very similar things. Okay, so before people just chuck this out the window and be like, "Ah, this is just a bunch of BS." Maybe not. Let's give it a try. So continuing. But God led the victorious armies of the Hebrews, and heathen dared not attack them. Unfortunately, a man does not always obey his better self. Indeed, which is why the whole idea of cycles is such a big part of so many of these Eastern religions. So the fidelity of the Israelites to their God did not long endure, and they soon forgot all the favors which he had heaped upon them, and rarely invoked his name, but begged protection of the magicians and the sorcerers, which is funny because that's kind of what the Bible says. The kings and captains submitted their own laws for those that Moses had left to them. The temples of God and the customs of worship were abandoned, and the people gave themselves up to pleasures and lost their original purity. Several centuries had elapsed since their departure from Egypt when God again thought of influencing punishment on them. Strangers began to invade the country of Israel, devastating the land, ruining the village, and forcing the inhabitants into captivity. The heathens at one time came from beyond the seas, from the country of Romulus. They subdued the Hebrews and appointed commanders of the army who governed them under the orders of Caesar. They destroyed the temples, compelling the people to sacrifice victims to the heathen gods instead of worshiping the invisible God. Interesting. Warriors were made of the nobles. The women were torn from their husbands. The lower class of the people, reduced to slavery, were sent by thousands across the sea. As to the children, they were killed by the sword, and throughout the whole country of Israel nothing but weeping and groaning was heard. In their sore distress the people remembered again their great God. They implored his mercy and prayed him to forgive them. Our Father, in his inexhaustible kindness, listened to their appeal. This is interesting too. So, as to the children, they were killed by the sword, and throughout the whole country of Israel nothing but weeping and groaning was heard. So they're talking about the Roman takeover of this whole thing and how brutal they were towards the people, which is interesting because, there is no account of Herod actually killing anybody, but, you could see an invading force that isn't necessarily a nice invading force, like any invading force is nice. But they definitely slaughtered quite a few people, which, of course, is the nature of war. So the time had now come when the merciful judge had chosen to incarnate himself in a human being. And the eternal spirit, who remained in a condition of complete inaction and of supreme beatitude, aroused and detached himself for an indefinite time from the eternal being, in order to show, by assuming the human form, the means of identifying oneself with divinity and attaining eternal felicity, and to show by his example how we may attain moral purity and separate the soul from its material envelope, so that it may reach the perfection necessary to pass into the kingdom of heaven, which is unchangeable and where eternal happiness reigns. Soon after, a wonderful child was born in the land of Israel. God himself spoke by the mouth of this child of the insignificance of body and the grandeur of soul. The parents of this child were poor people belonging by birth to a family distinguished for their piety, who had forgotten their ancient grandeur on earth in celebrating the name of the Creator and thanking him for the misfortunes with which he was pleased to try them. To reward this family for remaining firm in the path of truth. So that's interesting. This paragraph we just read is kind of exactly what the crucifixion and eyewitness describes about them as well, just to throw it out there. And also the infancy gospel of James also talks, both of them, about being pious, especially Mary, who apparently spent 12 years at the temple. What temple? I don't know. Continuing, to reward this family for remaining firm in the path of truth, God blessed their firstborn child and elected him to go forth and uplift those that had fallen in evil, and to cure those that were suffering. The divine child, to whom they gave the name of Isa, began to speak while yet a child, as one indivisible God, exhorting the erring souls to repent and to purify themselves from those sins of which they were guilty. People came from all parts to listen to him, and they marveled at the words of wisdom which issued from his childish mouth. All the Israelites affirmed that in this child dwelt the eternal Spirit. When Isa reached the age of 13 years, the time when an Israelite should take a wife, the house where his parents earned a living I'm sorry. The house where his parents earned a livelihood by means of modest labor began to be a place of meeting for the rich and noble people who desired to have the young Isa for a son in law who was already well known by his edifying discourses in the name of All Powerful. It was then that Isa disappeared secretly from his father's house, left Jerusalem, and with a caravan of merchants went towards Sind, with the purpose of perfecting himself in the divine knowledge and the studying of the laws of the great Buddha. In the course of his 14th year, so the book that we wrote that we read beforehand, the Crucifixion and Eyewitness, they claim that he went to Egypt, just like the Bible says, became part of the Therapeutae, learned through them, and then was initiated at around the ages, I think, of 12 or 13 or something like that. So I'm assuming that in a lot of ways, because that main book that I read was about the crucifixion itself, they throw in a couple of little clues beforehand, or at least, what if you want to believe them. But I think, after the initiation, his initial initiation, it makes perfect sense with John the Baptist. It makes perfect sense that he would have continued his spiritual teaching or his learning and teaching and all that stuff. So let's see here. Continuing. With the purpose of perfecting himself in divine knowledge and of studying the laws of the great Buddhas. In the course of this 14th year, the young Isa, blessed of God, crossed the Sind and established himself among the Aryas in the cherished country of God. The fame of this wonderful youth spread throughout northern Sind when he crossed the country, the 5 rivers, and the Rajputana. Excuse me. The worshippers of the Jaina god implored him to dwell with them. But he left them and went to Jagannath in the country of Orissa, where lie the mortal remains of Vyasa Krishna, where the white priests of Brahma received him joyfully. They taught him to read and understand the Vedas, to cure with the aid of prayers, to teach and explain the holy scriptures to the people, and to drive away the evil spirits from the body of man, and to restore to him the human form. He spent 6 years in Jagannath, Rajagriha, and Benares, and other holy cities. Everyone loved Isa, for he lived in peace with the Vaishyas and the Shudras, to whom he taught the holy scriptures. But the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas said to him that the great Parabrahma had forbidden them to approach those whom he had created from his belly and from his feet, and that the Vaishyas were authorized to hear the reading of the Vedas only on the festival days, and that the Shudras were not only forbidden to attend the reading of the Vedas, but even to look at them, for their condition was so severe, so was to serve forever as slaves to the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, and even the Vaishyas. Exactly. What a great system. Death alone can free them from their servitude, Parabrahma has said. Leave them, therefore, and come and worship with us the gods that will be angry with you if you disobey them. But Isa did not heed their words and went among the Shudras to preach against the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas. He strongly denounced the doctrine that gave to men the power of robbing their fellow men of their human rights. In truth, he said, quote, God the Father has established no difference between his children, who are equally dear to him, unquote. Isa denied the divine origin of the Vedas and the Puranas, for he taught his followers that one law had been given to men to guide him in his actions. Quote, fear thy God, bend thy knee only before him, and bring to him alone thy offerings which come from thy labors, unquote. Isa denied the Trimurti and the incarnation of the Parabrahma in Vishnu, Shiva, and other gods, for he said, quote, the eternal judge and the eternal spirit composes the one individual soul of the universe, which alone creates, contains, and vivifies the whole. Now, I will just say that idea is certainly present in what people would call Hinduism, whatever that really means, because it's a conglomeration of so many different religions, and we will be going into this big time because so much of the research I've done and the comparative, the theology, and the parable, so many aspects of the Deccan Southern style religion of India, which is really the ones that are proponents of, say, the Kundalini and that kind of thing. In the end, this is essentially their goal as well. So I find it fascinating that he says this here. But continuing, it is he alone who has willed and created, who exists from eternity, who exists, will have no end. There is none equal to him, neither in heaven nor on earth. The great creator has shared his power with no one, still less with inanimate objects, as they have taught you, for he alone possesses all power. He willed, and the world appeared. By one divine thought, he united the waters and separated from them the dry part of the globe. He is the cause of the mysterious life of man, in whom he has breathed a part of his own. He has subordinated to man the land, the water, the beasts, and all that he has created, and which he himself preserves in unchangeable order by fixing the proper duration of each. The anger of God will soon fall upon man, for he has forgotten his Creator. He has filled his temples with abominations, and he adores numerous creatures, which God has subordinated to him. For in order to please stones and metals, he sacrifices human beings, in whom dwells a part of the Spirit of God. For he humiliates those who toil by the sweat of their brow to gain the favor of the idol, who sit at sumptuously furnished tables. That's funny. That sounds like something out of Philo of Alexandria's On the Contemplative Life. Those who deprive their brothers of the divine gift shall be deprived of it themselves, and the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas will become Shudras of the Shudras, with whom the Eternal will dwell forever. Because on the day of the last judgment, the Shudras and the Vaishyas shall be pardoned on the account of their ignorance. On the other hand, God will pour his wrath upon those who have arrogated his rights. The Vaishyas and the Shudras greatly admired these words of Isa and begged him to teach them how to pray so that they might secure their happiness. He said to them, "Do not worship idols, for they do not hear you. Do not listen to the Vedas, in which the truth is perverted. Do not believe yourselves superior to others everywhere. Do not humiliate your neighbor." What's interesting is that this, in a lot of ways, this is a pushback, this whole paragraph. This is a pushback to the entire Aryan invasion and the subjugation of the people and their religions. And then, of course, after that, the assimilation of the various religions in India into the Vedas themselves. Shiva worship being one of the big parts of that. So continuing, help the poor, sustain the feeble, and do no evil to anyone. Do not covet what others possess, and you do not. The white priests and the warriors, having learnt of the discourse which Isa had addressed to the Shudras, determined upon his death, and with this intention sent their servants to search for the young prophet. But Isa, warned of the dangers by the Shudras, left Jagannath by night, reached the mountains, and established himself in the country of the Gautamides, so the Gautama Buddhas, where the great Buddha Sakyamuni was born amidst the people who worshipped the one and only Sublime Brahma. Having learned perfectly the Pali language, the just Isa devoted himself to the study of the sacred rolls of the sutras. So there you go, and that right there is that's a direct connection with what I was saying. Okay, devoted himself to the study of the sacred rolls of the sutras, and the Pali language definitely indicates that he is influenced certainly by the southern Indian style of religions or religious theology and ideas. Continuing, 6 years afterwards, Isa, whom the Buddha had chosen to spread the holy doctrine, was able to explain perfectly the sacred rolls. Then he left Nepal and the Himalayan mountains, descended into the valley of Rajputana, and journeyed towards the west, preaching to various peoples in the possibility of man's attainment, the supreme perfection, and the good which each one should do to his neighbor, which is the surest means of being quickly absorbed into the eternal spirit. Quote, "He who had recovered his primitive purity," unquote, Isa said, quote, would die having obtained pardon for his sins and the right to contemplate the majestic figure of God, unquote. In traversing the heathen territories, the divine Isa taught that the worship of visible gods was contrary to natural law. For man, he said, has not been favored with the power to see the image of God and to construct a host of divinities resembling the Eternal One. Besides, it is incompatible with the human conscience to esteem the grandeur of divinity. Besides, it is incompatible with the human conscience to esteem the grandeur of divine purity less than animals or works executed by the hand of man in stone or metal. The eternal legislator is one infinite. There are no other gods but him. He has not shared the world with anyone, nor has he informed anyone of his intentions. Just as a father would act towards his children, so shall God judge men after their death according to his merciful laws. Never will he humiliate his child by making his soul migrate into the body of a beast as in purgatory. The celestial law and the Creator through the mouth of Isa, quote, sorry, quote, the celestial law, said the creator through the mouth of Isa, and then quoting again, scorns the immolation of human beings to a statue or to an animal, for I have dedicated to the use of man all animals and all that the world contains, unquote. All has been given to man, who is thus directly and intimately bound to me, his father. He who has taken away my child will be severely judged and chastised by the divine law. To the eternal judge, man is nil, just as an animal is to man. Therefore, I say unto you, leave your idols, do not perform ceremonies that separate you from your father, and link and bind you to priests against whom heaven is turned. Yep, right here. This is a huge... Like, this is the whole problem with religion. What happened to my thing? I lost my, there we go. This is the whole problem with religions, guys. I mean, things can start off well. People are taught the actual things that help to free them spiritually, and then the priest class comes in and ruins it all. You know, it's again cyclical, so, you know, here we go. This is an interesting way of saying this, but this is true. Because in every single major religion, this has happened. So continuing, for it is they who have led you astray from the true God, and those superstitions and cruelty are leading you to the perversions of spirit and to the loss of all moral sense. The words of Isa were spread abroad among the heathen in the countries throughout which he traveled, and the people abandoned their idols. Seeing this, the priests demanded from him, who glorified the name of the true God, proofs of the reproaches that he had heaped upon them, and the demonstration of the powerlessness of their idols in the presence of the people. And Isa replied to them, if your idols and animals are powerful and really possess a supernatural power, let them annihilate me on the spot. Perform a miracle, the priest answered him, and let thy God confound ours if they inspire him with disgust. But Isa answered, the miracles of our God began with the creation of the universe. They take place now every day, every moment, and whatsoever does not see them is deprived of one of the most beautiful gifts of life. Boom. Right there. Now see, that right here is very much something that you hear yogis absolutely talk about all the time. And there is a quite famous one on YouTube named Sadhguru. And guess what the name of his foundation is? It's called the Isha Foundation. And like I have shown in the Bhavishya Purana video, I did show you guys the etymology of some of these words, and the reason why Isa is in this book, why Jesus is called Isa. There's not a mistake behind this. This has an actual etymological meaning for it. And if I'm not mistaken, it means initiated teacher or something to that effect. I don't exactly remember off the top of my head, but continuing. But this last one, man, this is great. This is really great. And it is not upon pieces of inanimate stone or metal or wood that the anger of God will fall, but it will fall upon men, who must, for their own safety, destroy all the idols which they have made. Just as a stone and grain of sand, which are as nothing before men, wait with resignation the time when he will utilize and make of them something useful and beautiful, just so man must wait for the great favor which God will accord him in honoring him with a decision. But alas, for you, opponents of men, if it is not the favor but the wrath of divinity that you await, woe unto you if you wait for him to show his power by miracles. I agree. I don't, that's one of the big hang-ups with their Christianity is this emphasis on the miracle part of it, when maybe the whole point of it was for him to show us that we all have the power to tap into this divine part of ourselves. Which, I mean, if you read what he says, he kind of says that, and the Gospels definitely try to frame it in a way that puts him in this kind of Jewish context, and I think that is part of what these priests and these priest class kind of did. So just saying, believe this or not, like I'm just kind of throwing out my thoughts out here. So let's see here. Continuing, for it is not the idols which he shall destroy in his wrath, but those who have erected them. Their hearts shall be prey to an eternal fire, and their lacerated bodies will be given to satisfy the appetites of wild beasts. Excuse me. God will expel the contaminated animals from his flock, but he will take back to himself those who were misled by having misunderstood the celestial spark which dwelt in them. There you go again, what I just said, right? Seeing the powerlessness of their priests, these people believed in the teachings of Isa and adopted his faith in fear of the anger of the divinity broke their idols in pieces. Seeing this, the priests fled to escape the popular vengeance. And Isa taught the heathen not to try to see the eternal spirit with their own eyes, but rather to feel it with their heart, and by a soul truly pure render themselves worthy of his favors. There you go, the meditative idea. He said to them, quote, "Not only must you desist from making human sacrifices, but in general from sacrificing any animal to which life has been given, for all that has been created is for the benefit of man. Steal not the property of another, for this would be taking away from your neighbor the things which he has acquired by the sweat of his brow. Deceive not anyone, thus you shall not be deceived yourself. Try to justify yourselves before the last judgments, for then it will be too late. Do not give yourselves up to the debauchery, for that is violating the laws of God. Supreme happiness shall be attained not only by purifying yourselves, but also by guiding others in the way which will achieve for them the primitive perfection." The neighboring countries were filled with the renown of the teaching of Isa. When he entered Persia, the priests became alarmed and forbade the people to listen to him. But when they saw all the villages greeting him with joy and piously listening to his sermons, they caused him to be arrested and brought before the high priest, where he was submitted to the following questions. Quote, "Of what new God dost thou teach? Dost thou not know, unfortunate one, that thou art, that the holy Zoroaster is the only just man admitted to the honor of receiving communications from the Supreme Being?" Unquote. Quote, "He has ordered the angels to record in writing the words of God for the use of his people, the laws that were given to Zoroaster in paradise. Who then art thou that darest to blaspheme our God and sow doubt in the hearts of believers?" Unquote. And Isa said unto them, quote, "I do not speak of a new God, but of our heavenly Father, who existed before the beginning and who will exist after the eternal end. It is of him that I have taught the people, whom like an innocent child cannot yet understand God by the only force of their intelligence and penetrate his divine and spiritual sublimity. But as a newborn child recognizes in the dark its mother's breast, just so your people who have been led in error by your erroneous doctrine and religious ceremonies have recognized instinctively their Father in the God of whom I am the prophet. The eternal being says to your people through the medium of my mouth, quote, you should not worship the sun, for it is only a part of the world which I have created for man," unquote. "The sun rises in order to warm you during your labors. It sets as to give you rest which I have fixed. It is only to me and to me alone that you owe all that you possess, all that surrounds you either above or below." "But," began the priest, "how could your people live according to the laws of justice if they have no teachers?" Isa answered, quote, "As long as the people had no priests, they were governed by natural laws and preserved the candor of their souls." Ooh, that's a good point. And well, maybe not, who knows, but quote, "Their souls were in God, and when they wanted to communicate with the Father, they did not have recourse to the mediation of an idol, an animal, or a fire as you practice here. You pretend that one must worship the sun, the spirit of good and evil. Well, I say to you that your doctrine is detestable. The sun does not act spontaneously, but by the will of the invisible God who has created it. And who has willed that this star should light the day and should warm the labor and the crops of man? The eternal spirit is the soul of all that animates. You commit a great sin in dividing him into the spirit of evil and that of good, for there is no God except that of good. Who, like unto the Father of and that's this idea of there is no God except that of good means essentially also that there is no reality except for the reality in God. So just throwing that out there. Who, quote, who like unto the father of a family does only good to his children, whose faults he forgives if they repent of them. And the evil spirit dwells upon the earth in the heart of those men who turn the children of God from the right path. Therefore I say unto you, fear the judgment day, for God will inflict a terrible punishment upon those who have forced his children to deviate from the true light, and who have filled with them the superstition and prejudice. Upon those who have blinded the seeing, carrying contagion to the strong, and taught the worship of those things which God has given to man for his own good, and to aid him in his labors. Your doctrine is therefore the fruit of your error, for in desiring to approach God of truth, you have created for yourself false gods. After listening to him, the priests resolved to do no evil to him, but during the night, while all in the city slept, they led him outside the walls, and there left him to his fate upon the highway in hopes that he would soon become the prey of wild beasts. Oh, that's some nice Zoroastrianism right there. But protected by our God, Saint Isa continued his way unharmed. Isa, whom the Creator had chosen to bring back the true God to men plunged in sin, was 29 years old when he arrived in the land of Israel. Since the departure of Isa, the heathen had caused the Israelites to endure still more atrocious sufferings, and they were now a prey to the greatest despair. Many among them had already abandoned the laws of their God and those of Moses, hoping to soften their fierce conquerors. In the presence of this situation, Isa exhorted his countrymen not to despair because the day of redemption of sins was near, and he strengthened their belief in the God of their fathers. Children, do not give yourselves up to despair, said the Heavenly Father by the mouth of Jesus or Isa. Quote, for I have heard your voice, and your cries have reached even unto me. Do not weep, O my beloved, for your cries have touched the heart of your heavenly Father, and he has forgiven you as he forgave your ancestors. Do not forsake your family to plunge yourselves into iniquity. Lose not the nobility of your feelings, and worship not idols which will remain deaf to your voice. Fill my temple with your hope and your patience, and do not abjure the religion of your a religion of your fathers, for I alone have guided them and heaped favors on them. You shall raise those who have fallen. You shall give food to those that are hungry, and you shall help the sick, that you may be pure and just at the day of judgment, which I am preparing for you. The Israelites came in throngs to hear the word of Isa, and asked him where they should praise their heavenly Father, since the enemy had razed their temples to the ground and laid profane hands on their sacred vessels. Isa answered them that God had no reference to temples built by the hand of man, but that he meant the hearts of men, which are the true temples of God. Enter into your temple, and that's funny because they just straight up tell you it's here, whereas like people have to figure that out in the allegory in the Bible. Quote, enter into your temple, into your I guess he does say that. Enter into your temple, into your heart, enlighten it with good thoughts and with patience and with firm confidence which you should place in your Father. And your sacred vessels, these are your heads and eyes, and see. Okay, sorry, let me go back. And your sacred vessels, these are your heads and eyes. See and do which is pleasing to God, for in doing to your neighbor you perform a ceremony which beautifies the temple where he lives, who has given you life. So this is a very interesting sentence, because this is essentially what karma is. Karma is action, and so all things that you do are karma. And so if your action with intent, with actual conscious intent of understanding your action, is something that will be pleasing to God, because you are constantly doing it as a ceremony which beautifies your own temple, but all temples across the board. This is a very interesting paragraph that says that in a different way. Just throwing that out there for you guys. So, for God has created you in his own image, innocent, with the soul pure, the heart filled with kindness, and not intended for the conception of evil schemes, but made to be the sanctuary of love and justice. Do not, therefore, defile your heart, I say unto you, for the eternal being dwells there always. If you wish to accomplish work of piety or love, do them with an open heart, and let not your action be governed by hope of gain or mercenary thoughts. For these actions will not bring you salvation, and you will then fall into a state of moral degradation where lying, theft, and assassination pass as generous deeds. You see what I'm saying about the whole idea of this? This is really what they're talking about is karma. They're kind of saying that here as well. You know, if your intention, okay, is of these kinds of things, then these kinds of things will be the way you think and perceive life. And look around the world and tell me that that's not a true statement. Continuing, Holy Isa went from one city to another, confirming with the word of God the courage of the Israelites, who were ready to succumb under the weight of despair, and thousands of men followed to hear his teaching. But the rulers of the cities feared him and informed the principal governor who dwelt at Jerusalem that the man called Isa had arrived in the country, that by his sermons who was rousing the people against the authorities, that the multitude listened to him eagerly and neglected the works of the state, stating that in short time it would be rid of its ruling intruders. Then Pilate, the governor of Jerusalem, ordered them to seize the person of the preacher Isa, bring him to the city and lead him before the judges, but so as to not excite the discontent among the people. Pilate ordered the priests and the wise men, aged Hebrews, to judge him in the temple. It's interesting. Meanwhile, Isa, continuing his preaching, came to Jerusalem. Having learned of his arrival, all the inhabitants who knew him already by reputation went to meet and greet him. They saluted him respectfully and opened the doors to their temple to him in order to hear from his lips what he had said in the other towns of Israel. And Isa said unto them, quote, "The human race is perishing because of its lack of faith, for the darkness and the tempest have confused the flock of mankind, and they have lost their shepherd." Interesting that he says mankind and human race and all that stuff. He's not basically, this whole idea that he preached to Gentiles because it wasn't just about the Jews. I think is kind of a good point, but that statement is an interesting addition to that. Continuing, but the tempest will not last forever. The darkness will not hide the light forever. The heavens will soon become serene. The heavenly brightness will soon spread over the whole earth, and the wandering flocks will gather themselves around their shepherd. Do not try to seek for the direct roads in darkness for fear of falling in a ditch, but gather together your lost forces, aid each other, place all your confidence in your God, and wait until the first light appears. He who aids his neighbors aids himself, and whoever protects his own family protects his people and his country. For be sure that the day is near when you will be delivered from darkness. You shall gather yourselves together in one family, and your enemy who ignores the favor of the great God shall tremble in fear. The priests and the elders who listened to him, full of wonder at his words, asked him if it was true that he tried to arouse the people against the authorities of the country, as has been reported to Governor Pilate. One can rise against this is what Jesus or Isa says. One can rise against misled men to whom darkness has. Can one rise against misled men to whom darkness has hidden the way and the door? Answered Isa. I have only warned the unfortunate as I do here in this temple, so that they may not advance further on dark roads, for an abyss is open at their feet. Earthly power is not of long duration, and it is subject to many changes. It would be of no use for a man to revolt against it, for one power always succeeds another, and it will thus be until the extinction of humanity. On the contrary, do you not see that the powerful and the rich sow among the sons of Israel a spirit of rebellion against the eternal power of heaven? Question mark. I could easily say this statement about right now and the last 150 years. There has been a march of materialism and this darkness that our overlords, our new, lords and masters, the likes of Rockefellers and DuPonts and Rothschilds and all that other stuff. Isn't it funny that our entire education system has been based off of sowing rebellion between people and dividing them and keeping them from these ideas? I just want to point that out. Like, this, to me, is a very, very interesting section of this book. Continuing, and then the elders said, "Who art thou, and from what country art thou come even to us? Heretofore we have not heard thee spoken of, and we are even ignorant of thy name." "I am an Israelite," answered Isa, "and on the day of my birth I saw the walls of Jerusalem, and heard the wailings of my brothers reduced to slavery, and the lamentation of my sisters carried away among the heathen. And my soul was painfully grieved when I saw that my brothers had forgotten the true God. While yet a child, I left my father's house to go and settle among other nations. But Hearing that my brothers suffered still greater tortures, I returned to the country where my parents dwell to recall my brothers to the faith, to their ancestors, which teaches us patience upon earth, so that we may obtain perfect and sublime happiness above. And the learned elders asked him this question. They claim that thou deniest the laws of Musa, and that thou teachest the people to abandon the temple of God? And Isa answered, We do not demolish what has been given by our heavenly Father and what has been destroyed by sinners, but I have advised them to purify their heart of every stain, for there is the true temple of God. As for the laws of Musa, I have tried to reestablish them in the heart of men, but I tell you that you do not understand their true meaning, for it is not vengeance, but pardon that they teach. Only the sense of these laws has been perverted. Having heard Isa, the priests and the learned elders decided among themselves not to judge him, for he did no evil to anyone, and presented themselves before Pilate, the governor of Jerusalem, chosen by the heathen king of the country of Romulus. They addressed him thus, quote, We have seen the man whom thou accusest of exciting our people to revolt. We have heard his teachings, and we know that he is our fellow countryman. But the rulers of the towns have sent thee false reports, for he is a just man who teaches the people the word of God. After having questioned him, we let him go in peace. The governor became violently enraged and sent his servants in disguise to spy after Isa and to report to the authorities every word that he addressed to the people. The holy Isa continued, however, to visit the neighboring towns and preach the true ways of the Creator, exhorting the Hebrews to patience and promising them a speedy deliverance. During all this time, many people followed him wherever he went. Many did not quit him, but they served him as servants. And Isa said, quote, Do not believe in miracles performed by the hand of a man, for he who commands nature is alone able to perform supernatural things, while man is powerless to soften the rage of winds and to distribute rain. There is one miracle, however, that it is possible for man to perform. It is when, full of sincere belief, he decides to uproot from his heart all bad thoughts, and to attain this end he goes no more into the paths of evil. And all the things which are done without God are but great errors, seductions, and enchantments, which show only how far the soul of him who practices this art is full of shamelessness, falsehood, and impurity. Whew. Put no faith in oracles, for God alone knows the future, and he who has recourse to sorcerers defiles the temple which is in his heart and shows distrust for his Creator. Faith in sorcerers and their oracles destroys the innate simplicity in man and his childlike purity. An infernal power takes possession of him and forces him to commit all sorts of crimes and worship idols. While the Lord, our God, who has no equal in one, all-powerful, all-knowing, and present everywhere, it is he who alone possesses all wisdom and all light. It is to him that you must pray for being comforted in your griefs, aided in your works, cured in your sickness. Whoever will have recourse to him will not suffer refusal. The secret of nature is in the hands of God, for the world, before it appeared, existed in the depths of the divine thought. It has become material and visible by the will of the Most High. When you would seek him, become children, for you know neither the past, nor the present, nor the future, and God is master of time. Quote, Just man, said the disguised servants of the governor of Jerusalem, tell us whether we should execute the will of our Caesar or await our near deliverance. And Isa, having recognized in the questioners the people bribed to follow him, said to them, quote, I have not said that you would be delivered from Caesar. It is the soul which is plunged into error that will have deliverance, unquote. There can be no family without a head, and there can be no order among a people without a Caesar whom they must obey blindly, for he alone shall answer for his acts before the supreme tribunal. Does Caesar possess a divine right? The spies again asked, and is he the best of mortals? Quote, There is none best among men, but truly there are some that are sick, whom chosen men charged with this mission should care for, by using the means which the sacred law of our Heavenly Father confers upon them. Clemency and justice are the highest gifts granted to Caesar. His name will be illustrious if he holds to them. But he who acts otherwise, who transgresses the limits of his power over those under his rule, endangering their life, offends the great judge and wrongs his dignity in the opinion of men. Meanwhile, an old woman who had approached the crowd to hear Isa better was pushed aside by one of the disguised men who placed himself before her. Isa then said, quote, "It is not good for a son to push aside his mother so that he may occupy the front place which should be hers. Whoever does not respect his mother, the most sacred being after God, is unworthy of the name son." Listen to these words. Respect women, for she is the mother of the universe, and the truth of divine creation lies within her. She is the foundation of all that is good and beautiful, as also the germ of life and death. Upon her depends the whole life of man, for she is the moral and natural support of his labors. She gives birth to you, and amid suffering by the sweat of her brow, and she attends your growth until her death. You cause her the greatest anxiety. Bless her, adore her, for she is your only friend and support upon the earth. Respect and defend her, and acting thus you will win her love and her heart, and you will please God, and many of your sins will be forgiven. Therefore, love your wives and respect them, for they will be mothers tomorrow, and later elders of a whole nation. That's an interesting comment. I'm going to come back to that one later. But be submissive to your wife. Her love ennobles a man, softens his hardened heart, tames the beast, and makes a lamb of it. Yeah, sometimes wife and mother are inestimable treasures bestowed of God. They are the most beautiful ornaments of the universe. Ornaments. And of them will be born all who shall inhabit the world. Just as the God of armies formerly separated the light from darkness and the land from water, so woman possesses the divine talent to separate the good from evil intentions in man. Therefore I say unto you, after God, your best thoughts should belong unto women and unto your wives, and she is the divine temple where you will obtain easily perfect happiness. And I'll also say this, like they're talking about this, there's an element of this that is very true as well. And part of that is that our significant others are often the people we absolutely love and inspire us and all these things that they're talking about. But they're also the people who challenge us and give us the tests that we need to work with in life on a constant basis. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but the things that I get kind of miffed about in my life are I rarely am miffed about anything really late, at this point in my life, outside of my own relationship with my wife. And I love her dearly, but I tell you what, the only person that can really push my buttons is her. The only person that can bring my peace to a point where it's frazzled is her. And in a lot of ways, I've come to understand that, you know what, as much as those things do irritate me and whatever else, the problem is with me, really, in my reactions to these things, and not with her. And that I actually am thankful at the fact that somebody can sit there and push my buttons and as a way to telling me that, like, yeah, you still need some work. Keep going at it. You're doing great, but you still need work. So just keep that in mind, guys, when you deal with relationships with people in life, because there's something to it. Where's my mouse? Just died on me again. Don't want that. Where's my mouse? There it is. Okay, so continuing. Yes. Draw from this temple your moral force. There you will forget your troubles and your failures. There you will recover your wasted forces, which are necessary in helping your neighbors. And I think also this might also be an allegory, of course, to the fact that they're telling men to connect yourself with that feminine side, that feminine energy, the feminine male energy that makes up all things in life. It could very well be an allegory to that as well. Do not expose her to humiliations, for thereby you humiliate yourself and lose the sentiment of love, without which nothing can exist here below. Protect your wife, that she may protect you and all your family, and that you will do for your mother, your wife, for a widow, or for another woman in distress, you shall have done for your God. Holy Isa thus taught the people of Israel for 3 years in every town and village, on the highways and on the plains, and all that he predicted was realized. During all this time, the disguised servants of the governor Pilate observed him closely without hearing anything resembling the reports formerly made against Isa by the rulers of the towns. But the governor Pilate, fearing the great popularity of the Saint Isa, whom his opponents believed to be inciting the people to have himself chosen for king, ordered one of his spies to accuse him. Then he ordered the soldiers to proceed sea to arrest him, and they imprisoned him in a dungeon where they caused him to endure various torments, hoping thereby to force him to accuse himself, which would permit them to put him to death. The saint, desiring only the perfect happiness of his brothers, endured these torments in the name of the Creator. The servants of Pilate continued torturing him, reducing him to a state of extreme weakness, but God was with him and did not suffer him to die. Learning of the sufferings and tortures which their saint endured, the principal priests and wise elders requested the governor to set Isa free on the occasion of the great feast which was near at hand. But the governor refused them decidedly. They asked him to then have Isa appear before the tribunal of the elders in order that he might be condemned or acquitted before the feast. Pilate consented to this. The next day the governor called together the principal captains, priests, wise elders, as legislators for the purpose of having them judge Isa. They brought the saint from his prison, seated him before the governor between two robbers who were then on trial, and to show the people that he was not the only one to be condemned. And Pilate, addressing Isa, said, quote, "O man, is it true that thou dost incite the people against the authorities with the intention of becoming the king of Israel thyself?" Unquote. One does not become king by his own will, answered Isa, and they have spoken falsely to you in asserting that I was inciting the people. I have never spoken never spoken but of the King of heaven, and it is he whom I taught the people to worship. For the sons of Israel have lost their original purity, and if they do not have recourse to the true God, they will be sacrificed, and their temple will fall in ruin. Temporal power maintains order in a country. I have therefore taught them not to forget it, and I said to them, quote, "Live according to your position in fortune so as not to disturb public order." And I exhorted them also to remember that disorder reigned in their heart and in their soul. Thus the King of heaven has punished them and suppressed their national kings. Nevertheless, I said to them, quote, "If you resign yourself to your fate, the kingdom of heaven will be reserved for you as a reward." At this moment, the witnesses were introduced, one of whom testified, saying, quote, "Thou hast taught the people that the temporal power was nothing before that of the king, who would soon free the Israelites from the heathen yoke," unquote. Oh, boy. This comes straight out of the Sancho Niathan document in Corrier's Ancient Fragments, I think. I don't know if I'll get lucky here. Maybe not. Well, looks like I don't have... I was hoping maybe I could... Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, this is it. Okay, so... the mystical sacrifice of the Phoenicians. It was the custom among the ancients in the times of great calamity, in order to prevent the ruin of all, for the rulers of the city or a nation to sacrifice to the avenging deities, the most beloved of their children, as the price of redemption. They who were devoted for this purpose were offered mystically for Cronus or Saturn, whom the Phoenicians called Israel, and who after his death was deified, and instead in... Oh, I think that's what it said, right? And, instated in the Phoenicians still call an only son, and when great danger from war beset the land, he adorned the altar and invested his son with the emblems of royalty and sacrificed him, according to Eusebius. Now, I think that's pretty interesting, right? This whole section here. Just wanted to point that out real quick. Again, there is a tradition of this type of thing, and here we have, "Thou hast taught the people that the temporal power has nothing before that of the king, who would soon free the Israelites from the heathen yoke by sacrificing his only begotten son, Isa." Here we, So continuing, and this isn't a Buddhist document. Just throwing that out there, okay? If you believe that this is a real document. Continuing, quote, "Blessed be thou," said Isa, "for having told the truth. The King of heaven is greater and more powerful than terrestrial law, and his kingdom surpasses all kingdoms here below. And the time is not far distant when conformably to the divine will, the people of Israel shall purify themselves of their sins. For it is said that a precursor shall come and announce the deliverance of the people and unite them into one family." And the governor, addressing the judges, said, "Do you hear this? The Israelite Isa acknowledges the crime of which he is accused. Judge him then according to your laws, and pronounce upon him capital punishment." Quote, "We cannot condemn him," answered the priests and the elders. Quote, thyself heard that he alluded to the King of Heaven, and that he has preached nothing which constitutes insubordination against our laws." Unquote. The governor then summoned the witnesses who, at the instigation of his master Pilate, had betrayed Isa. This man came, and addressing Isa said, quote, "Didst thou not make thyself pass as king of Israel, when thou didst say that he who reigns in heaven had sent thee to prepare his people?" Unquote. And Isa, having blessed him, said, quote, "Thou shalt be forgiven, for what thou sayest cometh not from thee." Then, addressing the governors, he said, quote, "Why humiliate thy dignity and teach thy inferiors to live in falsehood, since even without this thou hast the power to condemn an innocent person?" Unquote. And these words the governor became violently enraged and ordered Isa to be condemned to death and the two robbers to be acquitted. The judges, having consulted together, said to Pilate, quote, "We will not take upon ourselves the great sin of condemning an innocent man and of acquitting robbers, which is contrary to our laws. Do therefore as thou pleaseth." Having said this, the priests and the wise men went out and washed their hands in a sacred vessel, saying, "We are innocent of the death of this man." Isn't that interesting? It's the opposite of what our biblical story says, huh? Fascinating. Okay, continuing. By order of the governor, the soldiers seized Isa and the two robbers and led them to a place of punishment, and there nailed them upon a cross which they erected. All day long the bodies of Isa and the two robbers remained suspended, dripping with blood under the guard of the soldiers. The people stood around about them, and the relatives of the tortured, praying and weeping. At sunset, again, sunset, just like the other book, the Crucifixion, an eyewitness, instead of the middle of the day, at sunset, the suffering of Isa ended. He lost his consciousness, and the soul of this man freed itself from his body to be absorbed in the divinity. According to this, right? Thus ended the terrestrial life of the reflection of the eternal spirit in the form of a man who endured so much suffering, saving hardened sinners. Pilate, however, through his own actions, feared the throng and returned the body of the saint to his relatives, who interred it near the place of execution. The people came to pray at his tomb, filling the air with weeping and wailing. 3 days afterwards, fearing a general uprising, the governor sent soldiers to raise secretly the body of Isa and bury it in some other place. The next day, the throng found the tomb open and empty, so that the rumor was spread that the supreme judge had sent his angels to carry away the mortal remains of the saint in whom he had dwelt on earth as part of the divine spirit. When the rumor reached Pilate, he was very angry and forbade them, under penalty of slavery and death, to ever utter the name Isa or to pray to the Lord for him. That's also fascinating. But the people continued to weep and to glorify their master aloud. So, and this might be, this isn't part of the Christian tradition, but if this is true, this may be a big reason why there are no historical references, because the guy running the area in which he operated basically wanted to wipe out his name from anything. Of course, he can't prevent people from, worshiping and praying and doing that kind of thing, but he, as a governor, has the ability to control information. Very interesting comment there, or very interesting part here. But the people continued to weep and to glorify their master aloud, so that many of them were led into captivity and subjected to torture and put to death. Then many of the disciples of the holy Isa left the country of Israel and went among the heathen, preaching that they must abandon their errors and think of the safety of their souls and the perfect happiness awaiting human beings in the immaterial world of light and wisdom, whereupon reposes in all his purity and perfect majesty, the great Creator. The heathen, their kings, their warriors, listened to these preachers, abandoned their absurd beliefs, left their priests and their idols to celebrate the praises of the very wise Creator of the universe and the King of kings, whose heart is filled with infinite mercy. So, that was pretty interesting, wasn't it? There is more to this. I'm not going to read it today. I think I might read through the summary to see if it's even worth actually sharing it with you guys, because I'm not actually sure, what the deal is with that. But, there's a lot of interesting stuff in this book. Again, there are elements of that are in this book that are elements in much older type of writings, like I showed you here at the Corey's Ancient Fragments, and the whole part that I went to for the Phoenician section It's weird because I have multiple versions of this Corey's Ancient Fragments book, and each one of them has a different translation of what's going on here. So, or at least with all of the stuff, like it's very strange. So it'd be interesting to find one that's like a much better translated version. But otherwise, I think this was an interesting read, and one of the cool things is that it definitely shows that there may be the possibility that Jesus did spend some time in India and in the Tibetan regions, and he definitely learned spiritual knowledge, and which makes a lot more sense than the idea that like, oh, you're just born with this and then you get to do whatever. That's kind of the mythological part of it all, where the divinity of a person, which is, I mean, in this book, they refer to Jesus as a divine person, but it's a different way. And one of the interesting things and why this whole section with the Sakyamuni Buddhism is interesting is because apart from Gautama Buddha, the Sakyamuni Buddha, it's got a lot of similarities with the way Christianity thinks, and like even them, they look at Sakyamuni Buddha just like Christians look at Christ, very similarly in the same way. And in Sakyamuni Buddha, they do reference God, whereas in the Gautama Buddha, Gautama generally doesn't talk about God at all, doesn't refer to it because to him it's not that important. The God part of it is less important than your spiritual progression and journey into yourself. Because once you do that, and once you go inward, like Jesus says, right, the kingdom of heaven is within you. It's the same exact idea behind many of the real yogis and Buddhists that teach the same thing, the same idea. And so one of the reasons why Gautama Buddha did not expound greatly on God is because the fact that he looked at that as a distraction. And I will get into that at some point, but he didn't. As a matter of fact, there's a famous part where someone asks him, "Is there God?" And in the morning he says no, and everyone's celebrating. And then this atheist guy comes by, and he asks him again, "Is there God?" And he says yes. And he does that in a way to show you that, like, yeah, well, you see how you guys react when you say one thing and then you react for the other, but then you're missing the point that you're not actually working on your soul. You're not working on yourself. You're not doing these things that should probably be done. And that is one of the interesting things in this book that we just read, The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ, is that you have very similar ideas being played out here. And in the scriptures themselves, they are obviously, let's just not to say obviously, they are in the New Testament, and they're peppered all over the various Gospels. And so being able to really go out without this idea that one person has such a connection to a certain theology or a religious idea, that kind of stuff, this is one of those things where we have to step back and realize that the religions of the world are very much related to themselves. And once a person can sort of like, sit and really pay attention to that kind of thing, you start to see these connections across the board. And just like Jesus or Isa says in this book, and I'm sure I'm missing, I can't think of a biblical verse off the top of my head, but like, wasting your time doing all these things on religious wise, when really you only should be paying attention to yourself and working on your soul and working, finding that kingdom of heaven within you, which, meditation is the only true way to get to that. And there's a lot of little references to that. So anyways, I'll wrap it up now. It's been long enough. I hope you guys enjoyed this audiobook. If you did enjoy it, please hit the like button. If you think other people would be interested in this, please share. And of course, the book itself is going to be listed in the description box. So if you guys want to take a look and give it a good deep study yourself, please do. It's right there for you. Otherwise, much love to all of you. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you guys in the next video or stream. And of course, I didn't do that very smoothly.